Hello, hi everyone. Welcome to a little talk, roughly an hour, I'd say, talking about COVID and the BLM movement that's happened of late. If you're joining me on Instagram, welcome, hello. I don't normally stream on everything. The experience you'll have on Instagram won't be as good as the experience you'll have on the general feed. So if you are on Instagram, I suggest that you switch over to my YouTube. You'll probably see everything that's going on a little bit better. For everybody else, if you could do me a massive favor and just type in the chat, just so that I know some people, just anyone's there, just so that I know somebody's there and listening to me, because that would be amazing if somebody actually was generally listening to me. Yeah, because if I can get some activity in the chat, Instagram as well. I've got a few waves. Hello everyone. Hope all is well. Oh, amazing. Okay, just needed to check that the chat does work. It does. Hello Hannah. Hope you guys are well. Yeah. So where to really begin? This stream is something that I've called why stats don't mean anything. So I guess I should probably kind of preface what I'm saying with an explanation. Hey Andy, hey Sophie, hello Becky, hello Tansy O'Neill, Brooke, hello everyone, welcome. When I say stats don't mean anything, it kind of comes from the knowledge that I've gained from when I studied psychology. This was only at A level. This was not I don't have a doctorate in anything like this. Bethany, Zoe, hello, welcome. I don't have a degree in this. I just have a very sort of basic understanding. We did a module on how to use stats, what it means, understanding that there are different types of data. So let's talk about, to begin with, the process behind stats. What normally happens is somebody somewhere needs to get a sample of something in order to achieve something else. So in reference to COVID, they need a sample size of how many people have got it so that they know how extreme their response needs to be. So what they do, typically what happens when you find stats, somebody employs somebody to find that data. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes people will try and do a survey through their PhD, so somebody might put that information out that way. But on the whole, somebody has injected cash to get the results that they're looking for. Now, you have to remember, when people do this, they have an agenda. They're doing this because they have a reason to get particular numbers. This can be seen most evidently in the kind of the conservative response to COVID-19 and everything that is happening that way. And I would also like to say, before I continue any further, if you have any questions about anything that I'm talking about, please ask in the chat. Please let me know if there's any questions that I can answer at all, or where I'm getting my information from, and I'll be happy to explain. So in relevance to the conservative response to COVID, one thing that I found very interesting, this is an article that I read by The Guardian, who first everyone's response will be, The Guardian are so left-leaning that they don't even know who they are anymore, which I would tend to agree. But one thing they pointed out that was quite interesting was that the numbers that the government are releasing in regards to COVID, and specifically the number of deaths that we've seen, only pertain to people who have been tested and have been tested positive for COVID-19. Why is this relevant? When you test somebody, you have what is called a sample size. So how many people you get to test is vital to how far you can extrapolate that data. Now, in this case, we have over 8.4 million tests done so far. Around 360,000 have been confirmed positive. And as of the 23rd, I believe it's the 23rd, we have had around 45,000 deaths. Now, if you represent this number as a percentage, it's much lower. And so somebody can say, well, look, this is a very low percentage of the number of people who have got it. And the problem is, you can argue that fact either way. So you could then take that information and say, well, actually, there are loads more people who have probably got it, been fine, and not being tested. And so actually that reduces the percentage even more. And unfortunately, you can then argue it the other way. So you could say, well, it's not taking into account the people that have died from it and haven't been tested. For example, there are scores of people who have unfortunately died in care homes, and because they haven't been tested, they haven't been included in those results. Now, percentages, whilst useful for specifying information for your argument, are actually the least reliable types of data, simply because what you can do with a percentage is you can manipulate it to mean anything that you want it to mean. What really matters are the numbers that you're comparing it to. So, for example, in the case of the number of deaths within COVID, it is safer to say that we have had around 50,000 deaths than it is to say only 1% of people who have contracted the disease have died from it. And the thing that is dangerous, the most dangerous about numbers, is not only can you lean it in any way that you like, numbers are very good at letting people be less than human. So by assigning somebody a number, you say to them, you are now a statistic, your humanity is stripped from you. And that's what I spoke to Ellis today. Ellis is a comedian and actor who's kind of turned vigilante. He had a campaign called Names Not Numbers. Started off when his grandpa sadly passed away from COVID. We spoke earlier today about what the movement meant and some of the questions and comments that he's had in response to it. So I'll play that for you now. Let's talk about names, not numbers. Let's talk about what the campaign is to start with.
All right. Are we on record now?
Yeah, man. I'm straight off the bat.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
You know, I did an interview the other day like this, and it was so structured. You know, it was so like, you know, asking questions, structuring it. But no, all right, I'm on board. I like your style of journalism, Ben. You know, like I could have just been saying any old crap by now. Thank God I haven't.
That's why I should probably like do terms and conditions apply before you enter the conversation.
It's fine. It's fine. You know, like I can. I'm quite happy to trip myself up. All right then, yeah. Go on then. Let's do some serious conversation. Okay, so names not numbers, which is one of the signs here. I thought I'd decorate for you.
I appreciate that. It looks good.
I don't often sit in a shrine of my own movement. You know. Well, names not numbers is a movement. It's got a few hundred people online, and a lot of people around the world are doing different things, like putting signs in their own windows for people they know they've lost, or just people in the news that have been lost due to COVID-19. And it started just from myself, kind of going down to Parliament with my granddad's name, which is this sign here. And I just wanted to show Boris Johnson his name. This government's very good at making it look like it's creating success stories. You know, like 15th of June, it was introduced that people have to wear face masks on the buses, and people went, yeah, well done, you know, it's a good idea.
Yeah.
It's a bit late, you know. If I throw you a birthday party 2 weeks after your birthday party, it's late. It's not your birthday anymore, is it? You know, it's gone. So it's not on, you know, the reaction's completely late. And a lot of people in this country, from what I'm understanding, and a lot of people I've spoken to, sorry, pipe just went past. A lot of people that I've been speaking to, you know, just because somebody does their job wrong, because they didn't know something was coming, it's not excusable. You know, if a firefighter misjudges what he should do on the day, and it leads to people being killed, he's done for it. You know, if a copper doesn't react in time, he's done for it. Considering that our government actually cut pandemic funding a few years ago and could see it coming. This whole idea we couldn't see it coming. We could. It was in Italy. It was in Spain. You know, if, three doors down sets on fire and there's women screaming out the windows, just because they're screaming in Italian doesn't mean that I shouldn't, leave my house. You know, that's the situation we're in. So Names Not Numbers is holding the government of all governments accountable for all lives caused by negligence and lack of action. Okay. If that sums it up well for you there.
I was stifling that sneeze for about 20 minutes. Oh my God. But I'll cut that out. Yeah, no, dude, that's perfect. Because I think there is kind of, something to be said for the fact that papers were released in 2016 to the world. That was like the only thing that is of real danger to us is not like we've prepped our military in most countries ready for human invasion, but they said that we don't have the infrastructure and the processes in place to deal with a viral issue. So we have known about it, not even just from the time that we've seen it in opening up in Wuhan, China, but years before that. I think even Bill Gates did a TED talk in something like 2012, stating that the only thing we're really vulnerable to as a society is something on a medical level.
Well, it's very true, and I think it comes with an air of arrogance. My grandmother said that we should have called this a plague. When we were all brought up, we're taught about the plagues that have happened throughout history, and it seems to be that at the end of every single one, we seem to go, "Oh, that's done. Thank God." That was the last big thing. It will never happen again. I'm not, of course, referring to this as the Black Death that took out essentially most of Europe. I'm not even comparing this to Spanish flu. But if you actually look at all those historical circumstances, what you see is that the kind of ruling parties at the time actually did what was essential to get rid of it. During the Black Death, they put a cross on your door, and that was it. If you had symptoms of that, Spanish flu, they were very strict on guidelines. We don't remember it now because, of course, World War One kind of overpassed that. What's more interesting in a history book? People being machine gunned across trenches and playing football, or people having to wear masks. We're much more fascinated by wars. But yeah, this disease, the true crime of it really is the government response. Some of the names that, of course, my grandfather, bless him, he had a long life. I've heard some ridiculous things that people saying to me online, on articles that they've seen about me, and in the street. Well, he was old. Just kind of get with it. Now, those kind of things are absolutely ridiculous because there's no reason that he should have been took at this time, and there's no reason that a man with such respect should have had such a undignified exit. My nana to see him through a window. I couldn't go down to the funeral. There's a lot of sadness in all of this, but some of the other names that we hold up are younger people. One of them is a gentleman who was still working in the taxis at the airports, and we were still taking in flights from infected countries, including China, well after they started to, fall apart about it. And other people, there's been people who have been spat at on public transport by people who have claimed to have coronavirus and then who have gone off and died, So there's a lot of just bizarrity to it. And the truth is, you haven't got to be left wing or right wing, because I know a lot of people are going to, see me and hear me, and they're going to say, he's some kind of little communist or little anarchist, something like that. They'd like to picture something like this with me wearing a balaclava and trying to set fire to a flag, But that's not true. But the thing is it doesn't matter if you're left wing, right wing, extreme that way, extreme that way. if a government, purposely makes choices that is going to let the elderly die, that deserves prison time. They all do. Matt Hancock, Johnson, just anybody in that top tier that has been in a meeting that knew we should have closed earlier, prison. Deserve it.
Do you think that there is... I think there seems to be a danger of people kind of excusing horrific acts with a lot of sort of micro slices of the problem. So, like, for example, in the case of your grandfather, they kind of dismiss the issue by saying, "Oh, he's old, therefore let's not worry about it." And that seems to be happening a lot in the social climate.
Oh yeah, I think that makes a point. I mean, just because people are old doesn't mean that it's somehow right that something picks them off first. I mean, what I find really funny at this time is there's a lot of debate at the moment about statues. And there's so much debate about what statues belong up, what statues deserve to come down. The other day, Steve Baker, one of the Tory MPs, he went to do a photo shoot by the Churchill statue, and I was quite near it. I don't know if you saw the tweet. I did, retweeted about it. And they wanted a nice photographic opportunity with some other MPs to kind of say, look, it's Armed Forces Day, we support this statue, look how glorious we are. Now, we were off to the side, and I've got to be honest, pretty much pissed me off that, we were stood there with names of people that would have heard Churchill the first time round. Whether or not you support Churchill, whether or not you think he's a racist, whatever, I think Churchill would be quite annoyed that that generation have just been abandoned, to be lonely in care homes and to just die without their families being able to see them, and that was a conscious choice by leaving the borders open and by not shutting down quickly enough. So yeah, we mobbed his picture.
I saw that.
I had a great little exchange with him. I asked him if he thought that Boris Johnson had, done a good job, and he just ignored me. So I called him a joke. He didn't like that either. He just walked off. What is that? Come on. Have an argue with me, Steve Baker. Pull it together, man.
I saw an article, and this is the kind of the key message of what you're trying to do, is saying that it's very easy to dismiss problems by representing people as numbers, but what it does is it dehumanizes them. It takes away the gravity of what those numbers actually mean. Yeah,
that's absolutely true, Throughout history, if you ever want to take away human emotion, you present it with a number. Now, look, I know that there's no easier way of doing statistically on the news the people that have died than by saying how many people have died. But, when we were fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq, if people died there, fair enough, they wouldn't show all their faces on one day, but they would show faces and they would speak to their families. The news has been so quiet about this, about people who have died and the families and the stories behind it, The people that can't go to funerals, the people that, have missed people's last words, the people who, had seemingly a perfectly healthy mum in their 40s and who in a few days' time, dies, For some people, the shock has just been huge. I mean, I've heard about people who have lost two people in the same day. My granddad's best friend died the next day after him. So, it's out there, and it really does affect families. But this is the thing, throughout history, I'll get back to my original point. If you want to make something seem easier for the rest of the population, just put it into numbers, The Soviets had an idea that one death was a tragedy and 1 million deaths is a statistic. Now, look at, every other instinct, mass scale prison camps. You know what? Obviously I don't want to bring the Holocaust into it, but people were given numbers in that process as well.
Yeah.
In every circumstance in history, when you want to make it seem that human life isn't as important, give someone a number and it will do it.
Yeah.
That's why your name's Ben, my name's Ellis. But, if you were number 4 and I'm number 5, well, who are they? What does that mean?
Yeah. What would you say to people who will listen to what you're saying and say, well, the death rate's only the same as the flu, so why is everybody kicking up a fuss?
Well, I'll tell you a reason why. first of all, we were told at the beginning of this that 20,000 would be a good number. Now, I remember hearing that number and thinking, that's a mad number. 20,000, that's insane. We're like 3 times past that now, and that's just the deaths that we know about. We're well past that. We have it on record of our own leaders saying that we need to take a hit, and this is coming, and we need to take a hit with it. Not even preempting it, not even trying to stop it. We were kind of made to feel in this country when Italy started going into lockdowns and, started forcing people in their homes, and Spain were being really aggressive of why people could go to the shops. We were being made to feel that, all these other countries, had fascist tendencies, and why are they like starving people's freedoms? And, we're British, so we'll have, common sense. British common sense has really never amounted to anything. All you've got to do is like look at the pictures on the beach. Somebody was, found to be defecating in a burger box down the beach the other day. If that is British common sense, yeah. Sorry to take the tone of the interview down.
I know.
But this is the thing, at Bournemouth Beach the other day, they left 12 tons of rubbish. Right. Now, I'm seeing a lot in the news about how can you distinguish that from certain protests that are going on, yada, yada, yada. Now, I'm not excusing either or circumstance of breaking mass social distancing rules, but I will say this. The moment that Dominic Cummings was caught out taking his wife on a jolly for her birthday, let's remember it's her birthday, okay, with his kid in the back of the car to test his eyes. Because I'm not sure about you, Ben, but when I really want to test my eyes right, I get my closest people in the car and I take them on a 60-mile drive. Do you do that with soap? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I always put a life on the line whenever I can't see.
But this is the point, So like, as soon as that happened, so many people in the country thought, well, what are we doing? They don't care about us. They, don't have any regard for the rules that they're expecting us to follow. So the country's collapsed. Boris has got absolutely no regard. It's just a joke. And the fact that people like Gove came out, Gove hilariously said to Nick Ferrari that he actually drove his wife once to test his eyes. The spiral of which all these people pretend to care is just drifting. And it's amazing to see, really. I don't know where we'll be after this as a society, but it just goes to show, if you vote in people who have no expertise in the sections that they're meant to be in, Hancock's never worked in a hospital. What is he doing as the head of the health health organisations? Get rid of him.
Yeah.
They're all idiots, and they don't care about us. They just care about being re-elected. And it takes, the death of people like my granddad to show that, really. I just hope that after this, people don't start going to the pubs and start thinking, I've got my pint again, I'm happy. The football's on, I've got my pint again, the world's gone back to normal. Yeah, but it has gone back to normal, but so many people have died due to absolute callousness. And we, as a Names Not Numbers organisation, are going to keep pushing, If Boris Johnson has a little success rally, I'm going to be there saying, have a look at this name, And there'll be more of us, The more the lockdown starts to collapse and the more they start to ease up rights, more people are going to come on these Names Not Numbers demonstrations, more names are going to be shown. And, the more embarrassment and the more we're going to push for accountability. That's the plan.
What would you say to, obviously, within the kind of the lockdown period, there have been quite a few sort of, 2020 has been a bitch, right? So we've just had like left hook after hook. Man. Yeah. So obviously there's the BLM movement, which has caused so much controversy. And that the protests that occurred then are in direct conflict with the message that you're sending. So where would you say you stand on that?
Well, you've got a BLM interview as well on the show, haven't you?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make sure to be listening to it. I completely support BLM. So I'm completely on board with all the messages. I think it's the right time to do it. I'm personally surprised. When I learned about the civil rights movements at school, we learned about it as if it had finished in the 60s. You have Martin Luther King, you have Malcolm X. They did their job. Everyone got the vote. Huzzah! That's what we're taught. And that's just not how society works. So I'm really good to see that people are supporting it, and that it is making a change, because it definitely is, from a lot of the conversations I've been having with people. Where I kind of go off in a kind of dissatisfied ways, certain instances in those protests are just really counteractive to the situation we're in at the moment. I saw on Channel 4, it was a BLM protester and a veteran, and they were shaking hands. They were shaking hands on television. What is going on? I'm not allowed to go and visit my grieving grandmother, but people are allowed to shake hands in the street. That's another way in which, authority is collapsing. I completely understand that people have got things they need to go out and protest for, but be safe while you do it. I know that a lot of photographers and that will be looking at finding specific ways to make it look as if it's worse than it is. And I've seen most people are wearing masks there. I've spoke to a lot of people who go on them, and I know that a lot of people say that most people are adhering to it. Just a case of being safe, isn't it? That's all I'd ask people to do, is to be safe when they're on them.
Okay. I had a couple of conversations with some friends of mine who spoke about the idea of a second wave and the concept of herd immunity. I wasn't sure where I stood on that, but it's an interesting prospect that the more people get it on the outset, the less people get it on the resurgence.
Well, herd immunity, first off, just following what we were saying, when people talk about we're going to get a second wave, there's a big chance we are. It's happening in China, it's happening in Germany. And the first case to happen again in New Zealand was a British person that went over to see his family. So, talk about, British bloody colonialism. Like, we're spreading other things now. So just very quickly, if there is a second wave, a lot of people are going to start going, it's Black Lives Matter, it's all of that. Not true. That nationally would be a small part of it. There's 10 times more people flocking to beaches around the country who aren't protesting. So, when there is a second resurgence, I think people are going to have to, get a grip and think about truly why. But herd immunity is, I think it's quite a medieval attitude. I've heard it a few times, herd immunity. Just think of an Attenborough documentary when you get loads of zebras and, which zebra can outpace the oldest or the weakest or the illest or the youngest zebra for a pack of lions to savage. If society prides itself on herd immunity, well, I just think that's a cop-out. Because herd immunity is all well and good if all your family are under 40 and, have the money to isolate somewhere in the distance. But, if you grow up in a tower block and you live with your grandmother and you're on quite low income and you work 0 hours contracts, or, you're spread out all over the country, or you don't really see anyone and, you're going to be lonely as well. Herd immunity doesn't work for you. Herd immunity works for people who have always been head of the herd and know they can run faster than the person at the back.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. I think that's a really good chunk. I think anything more than that, it will start to kind of muddy the message. So what can people do to help get behind you, even if they aren't invested in doing it now? Maybe they'll want to do it later. What's the best way to get behind the message?
Alrighty, so we have a Facebook page. It's just names, not numbers, symbol of a black handle. It's also on Instagram, and I'm going to set it up on Twitter as well today. for some reason, Twitter just takes me 10 times more to work things out, but I'm going to set it up on Twitter as well. But, if you, say you haven't lost somebody, or you don't know a family that hasn't lost somebody, that doesn't mean that you can't be outraged by the fact it's happening, It is, you don't have to know somebody who's affected to be pissed off at the fact that your government are letting these people down in the first place. So if you are affected, make a sign, names not numbers, put it in the window, take a photo of it, put it online, similar to you, man, I saw you going out and getting involved in BLM. I was very proud of you. I'm just going to say that on the record now. I know I sent you a message about it, but you can get involved. It's not like these kind of movements are owned by anybody. There are people that start them. There are people that push them forward. But there are two guys, the Rodriguez brothers, who come down with me. And the first day they turned up when I was down there by myself, they didn't think they were going to help out. And they got there, they saw me, and one of them defaced his jumper and with a slogan, and the other guy made a sign out of the bag. And he turned to me and he said, this is now bigger than you. And this is how it is. If you're at home and you're outraged by how this government has behaved, make a status, tag names not numbers in it, hashtag names not numbers, put a sign in the window saying what you think. Because, the truth is, my granddad deserved better, but we all deserve better as well. And that's just reality.
All right, dude. Thank you so much for speaking to me today. I think, for me personally, hearing kind of the side that explains the bit that nobody wants to listen to will hopefully do something to educate people and to communicate it. So thank you for taking that time out.
I really appreciate it, mate. And I always get quite riled up, So I'm happy we've had this conversation. It's good. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks, dude. All right, cool. I will catch you later then.
All right.
Take it easy. Okay, wow. So so many people, this is for the Instagram people, so many people have brought up some great points. The first one that I'm going to touch on before I get into the other ones is actually a point that Roanna made regarding the BLM protests. So we all kind of predicted that what would happen if and when the second wave comes, that everyone will go. It was the BLM protest that did it because they all broke the rules. They didn't social distance when they should have done. And actually, a study was released today investigating the impact of BLM on the rate of infection. Now, I haven't looked at the study. I haven't seen the source of who's done the study. I haven't seen who commissioned it or anything like that. But the outset seems to be that the infection rate contained itself within the protests themselves anyway, so didn't impact further than the people who were initiated in the gatherings. It also took into account the fact that people didn't want to go out because of maybe they were nervous about the protests, and so they didn't get infected. And it also closed down roads and public transport routes and things like that, and so people couldn't even get to see other people, and so reduced. All in all, the actual result of it was the impact was incredibly minimal. So I think that was a really interesting point. I'd be interested to see who has who commissioned that study. So Rona also had a question earlier. She said, why hasn't there been more repercussions for those in power when they have broken the rules? Now I want to open this up to all of you guys. If you've just joined me, the question I'm asking is, why hasn't there been more repercussions for those in power when they have broken the rules? Now, I personally think it's a relation to do with money and power. Both equate to making accountability much more difficult. I don't know if any of you agree or disagree, but after watching, the latest example could be Filthy Rich with Jeffrey Epstein, and we saw the malevolence and the evil that man effectively carried out, and how difficult it was to get the system to bear judgment upon him. I think there is a severe lack of accountability in general for those people who are in power. So that's my take on it. So if anybody else agrees or disagrees or has further points, please put them in the chat. I want this to be kind of a discussion between everybody watching. Shep has said, BBC has a page, Coronavirus, your tributes to those who have died. They are gathering tributes from those who have died, and you can add loved ones, which is actually something I didn't know about, and it is something that if Ellis could be here now, I'm sure he'd find that incredibly interesting, and that is definitely a good thing. Although I think his point was that oh sorry, Instagram followers got interrupted. The point that he had to make was that it wasn't done by anything in terms of the media. So I think there is a responsibility by people at the top and people with power to do more than just set up a website or something like that. It needs to be kind of, the impact needs to be made known. And I think what happened in Bournemouth today is a good example of that. And yeah, Big North Tom's made a point on Instagram. He said that it's the same reason police don't go into jail for murdering innocent people. Again, it is very difficult, it seems, to convict. He also had a point earlier which said that what the stats don't say is that 43,000 plus deaths actually equates to hundreds of thousands of people that have been victims and families torn apart, which is also a very good point. And it actually alludes to, in a roundabout way, something that Ali has said earlier on YouTube, where he says there needs to be a focus on insight instead of numbers. So yes, while they're loosely connected, I think they're saying a very similar thing, is that actually the impact needs to be important. Now, I think what Ali is saying in this, and I'll read the full statement, massive amounts of ambivalence with both, but the former paints more of a picture, whilst the latter is an ammunition for an argument. So the point that Ali is making here is that insight gives you the context of the numbers, which allows you to paint a more specific picture. An example with COVID would be that they originally thought that mixed race people were more vulnerable when it came to COVID. And then it was sort of questions and said, is it because there are larger sort of ethnic groups, mixed race groups in poorer communities with poorer facilities? And is that what equates to the numbers being the way that they are? Which, again, very good point. What else do we have? Guys, remember, if you're watching, you don't agree with anything that I'm saying, you have anything more to say, please jump in the conversation, because this is all good stuff. This was a point in reference to what Ellis was saying earlier on the interview. Without being able to hold funerals, so many will never have closure and never say goodbye. It must be devastating. I've not heard about any support systems being created. If anybody does know of any support systems that people can go to, or support systems that allow people to to help them to process what's happening or anything like that, please let me know. I know your normal charities have been completely swamped with it, but that's a very good point. I don't know if there is anything fresh being made. I have one from Peter that says the government voted that what they say in Parliament cannot be taken to court or used to prosecute. Wow. Okay, that's a very big statement. I guess, is that to do with the fact that things get heated in that discussion? I'm not sure what the justification of that might be. But if anybody does know or thinks that that's an invalid point, then please let me know. And the last point made by Andrew says, you've got enough money, you can do whatever you want, which seems to be the general consensus. Now, in a couple of minutes, I'm going to be inviting... how do I stop? Technical difficulties. Got it. I'm going to be inviting Jordan into the room. He's going to be talking to us about 3 specific topics: black on black crime, the kind of the paradox of black conservatives, and something called optics. We're just going to be discussing those things. If you have any points or questions to make throughout the entire thing, please let us know in the chat. If you throw them up in the chat, then we can get it sorted, and we can get them into the conversation. That's the most important thing. So if I just opening the room up. Well, that's an attractive view. Yeah, so again, if anybody's just joining or is unsure as to what else could be happening, please throw some questions in the chat room. He's called Flash Jordan. That's brilliant.
Can you see me?
I cannot see you, however, I can hear you.
Okay. Now can you see me?
Yes. How was your job, dude?
A little bit cringe, but it was alright.
A little bit cringe. A lot of them are.
I had to do basically host something on Zoom, a hen night, and then I had to dance as well. It's just weird on Zoom. It's just not. It's not right. Before, I was vibing in the living room to the music I was going to use, and I felt good. Yeah, this is nice. As soon as you're on a little webcam camera, you just feel like your energy goes into that, and you feel like you just have no vibe.
Yeah.
Form into a little. It's not the same.
It isn't the same. It's a very strange, Blade Runner-esque world that we're living in now, where everything's people getting married over Zoom and stuff. It's crazy times.
Yeah. I messaged you, by the way, because I was I just got off of it, so
I saw I'm live on Instagram at the moment, so I saw it popping up, and I saw that you tried to call me, and I couldn't respond. I apologize.
Okay. I was like, shit, I haven't had time to prep and whatnot, but it's cool.
Well, I think this is kind of a good space to just open up a conversation, and just kind of talk about different ideas and different stuff. Just spoke to a guy called Ellis who was talking about COVID and his stance on a lot of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, if you're happy to start, I guess. Let me preface this conversation for the people who are watching now. The concept of race and racism is one of the most bizarre and profound things that has ever been achieved in the history of mankind. And its conception happened whenever a particular set of people want to exert power over other sets of people. And that's entirely where it comes from. So when we talk about race, we aren't talking about something that's actual because we are all the same species. What we're talking about is a concept that is man-made. So we'll just start with that. Jordan, I wanted to talk to you about black on black crime. Start something light.
Okay. I don't know if you've mentioned it, but just to add to what you said, in particular to this conversation, obviously, with it being a concept, and whiteness itself as a concept was something that was created and wasn't even created until I think it was roughly, between 75 and 100 years after the beginning of the TST, the transatlantic slave trade.
Wow.
So that's something that a lot of people don't realize is that, and you can read about how different colonizers, they literally were saying to each other, okay, obviously what we're doing is fucked up, and we need to make people think that these people are less than us.
Wow.
We need to create an idea that, so people, because the average person is probably going to be like, actually, this is wrong, you shouldn't be doing this. But they create this idea that, the idea of the Negro being black, and obviously that goes deep into what actually black means and blackness and everything, but they created this idea of these people are subhuman, and as a complete opposition to whiteness and white being the ideal. And so like what you said about, racism being a concept, and whiteness in particular was purposely created, they thought about it, created it, and went, this is what we're going to do. And it's been working for however many 100 years now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I notice it most when I have to fill out forms. So I myself, my mother is white, she's from Yorkshire, and my dad is from Sri Lanka. So in theory, I am split. As far as we know, I haven't done a genetics test, but we're split down the middle in terms of where my heritage comes from. Now, when I fill in a form, I'm allowed to say that I'm mixed race or that I'm Asian, but I'm not allowed to say that I'm white, regardless of it being equal measure. And the reason for that is because in order to be white, it has to be pure. Any other description, if it's part Chinese, part Persian, it doesn't matter. As soon as you obscure the purity of whiteness, it becomes something that you cannot identify with.
And that's the funny thing as well, is it's like even other white folk were not considered white because they were not part of the colonizing nations. There was something about them that made them unpure, even though you would look at them and say they're whiter than some of these Spanish people who had North African in them, who had more blood in them. But yet these people, Italians, Eastern Europeans, Russian, they're not white apparently. By technicality, they're not white. And you go, what?
Yeah.
Literally was a certain group of people like, this is us, the rest of you are shit.
Yeah.
Like, literally.
Well, that, I mean, like, it was there was a point made on Facebook where they kind of were like, well, actually, you know, there was a trade in Irish people, which again is exactly like you're saying, is that it was the categorization of people outside of like the elite group that had been formed, which is why I find. Sorry, go on.
Before you carry on, quick question: shall we join up on the live as well on Insta?
Yeah. Okay. How do we do that?
I think I can request to join your video.
Oh, the only thing is I'll get a feedback loop. Actually,
Okay.
although if you join, oh no, because it will just keep feeding back. So I think we'll have to leave that. But it's something I'll look into in the future. Unless, wait, do you have headphones? Technical difficulties as always.
Yeah.
If you join the live with headphones and I do the same thing, then we should be able to get two platforms going. Apologies for the delay, guys. This might be a good opportunity to get a drink or something, just while we set this up. And Tom, that's a really good point. I will address that point in just a second. So let's see.
I'm going to turn the volume down on the live so I don't hear the...
I'm going to turn it down on the Instagram and hopefully that will balance it out. If it's annoying for people, please let us know in the chat room and we'll cut that out. All right, Tom's got a really good point. He said it was messed up they used science based on the size of skulls to justify their actions and treating black people as lesser. It's messed up when you learn how white colonizers justified their actions. Yeah, which I think is just further to the point, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to talk to you about following this almost kind of directly is the concept of black on black crime. In light of the things that we have just spoken about, what it means to categorize violence based on skin color. I find it quite interesting. So I see a lot of people kind of going, black on black crime is on the up, and it's the reason why these things are happening to them, etc., etc. And we know categorically that the common denominators for violence are not to do with skin color, because black people don't have a monopoly on violence. So it just doesn't make sense to categorize it that way. We know what they are. It's poverty, it's exposure to domestic violence, it's expulsion from schools, and it's lack of access to facilities or community intervention, wherever you are in the world. Where do you sit on that?
There's a conversation that's actually still going on a dance page on Facebook about this, because this young guy I think he's from Leicester, chimed in to talk about it and talk about the statistics, do the whole Ben Shapiro thing of, okay, but there's more violence towards black people because they commit more crimes. And so it's gone into this long, deep conversation. There's so many layers to it that are coming out, and people who say this don't realize how much of a vicious circle there is in this subject. Like, first off, like you said, black people don't have a monopoly on crime. Like, there is nothing inherent to your being in your genetics that makes you commit crime. Like, that's just ridiculous to think that. That's just ridiculous. And then when we're looking at the US, we're looking at one, like you said, all these reasons why there is certain amounts of crime in certain areas. But then if you're going to look at those areas and say, okay, well, there's a lot of poor black folk, and therefore, because they're poor, maybe they commit more crime. Okay. But then if you were to compare the poor white areas to the well-to-do white areas, the poor white areas will also have a higher percentage of crime than the rich white areas. So then race is not a common denominator there, because clearly you see, okay, resources, economic situation has a bearing in that.
Yeah. Sorry, can I just pause you for just 1 second? I know you're in a flow. I'm going to have to stop the Instagram live that we're both on, because apparently the echo is just too bad, so they can't hear anything. So I'm gonna cut you off. I apologize, and I am sorry for cutting off your flow. Leave that back open. My apologies. You were talking about specifics about crime in different areas not being representative of skin color.
Yeah, so obviously simple, white poor versus white rich. White poor, more crime. So automatically you go, okay, just like I'm sure if there was a rich black area in the US, that there would be very little crime there, you know? Because wealth, economic situation is a big factor. Then one thing that really annoys me, because this is something that has several aspects to it and is not hard to understand when you start talking about it. The justice system and the way policing works. We're seeing how policing works. People are starting to see, okay, actually the police treat black people terribly. They treat black people terribly, and yeah, they suffer more than white folk do. But also, the way the justice system works, on top of that, I'm sure a lot of people have been watching these Netflix series and films. I know people have suggested the Kid Browder story, 13, when they see us, all these things. And also the Meek Mill documentary. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but it was on Amazon Prime. I started watching it with my Philly boys in Philly. Meek Mill's from Philly. And the way the justice system works in America is also, it makes it relatively impossible to get out of if you get into it. And once you're in it, you're fucked.
Right.
And so you might get these poor black kids who, one, the police are picking on them, you know. Oh, it's a poor area, you know, they're from a downtrodden community, they're going to commit crime. And you've got high policing in the area just because they roll around looking for black kids. Mm. Then on top of that, you will see, like we see in these videos of these black men being killed, you'll see these people get harassed, get shot, get killed over what? Oh, he had a weapon. Oh, whatever the reason is. But they didn't do anything wrong. And for every person that died, there is probably dozens who weren't killed, but ended up in that situation with a police officer.
Yeah. And
that police officer arrested them or charged them with something and took them to the police station. And so then what happens is you go, okay, I did nothing wrong. Now I'm in a situation where I've been arrested for something that I didn't do. Okay, maybe they might have done something little, but for a lot of the time, they did nothing. Khalif Browder did nothing. Nothing was ever proven. Now they get to the police station, they're being charged with something, they're a suspect. Now they might end up in jail for a period of time while the trial is ongoing. They have the choice now. Okay, well, you can plead guilty to a lesser charge. You can plead guilty to small theft. Well, okay, I'll do that then. But that means that is on your record forever. That means you are now a criminal. That means they can use that against you. So if that was to happen again, and then the third time, that's it, you go down for life. So now some people go, okay, do I take that risk? But then they say, okay, but if you want to get out now, you've got to pay us $5,000. And judges will set bail fee whatever they want. Literally whatever they want. There's not like okay, he did this, so it has to be this. A judge can basically choose. I don't know, it's probably a bit different per state to state and whatnot. I don't know the ins and outs. But from what I watched, and especially in the Meek Mill documentary and different things, bail can be set by the judge essentially at their discretion. So you've first done nothing wrong. Now you're in a situation where you have the choice of potentially putting yourself at risk for going to prison for life, maybe, or think, okay, I just need to be good my whole life. Or I pay bail and I get out. but then that's going to cost me money. And given if you're from an impoverished family or a poor community, you don't have any money. So then you get so many young black kids who go, you know, I don't have the money, my parents don't have the money, I don't want my parents to find out, or whatever it is. Cool. I'll say, yeah, I did it, cool, let me go, I did it. So now they got something on record. So automatically that means crime rates have gone up, because you've got all these black people who didn't do anything, but just said they did, so they didn't have to pay money or go to prison. And then, like Meek Mill, for example, from what I can remember, a quick overview of the story, he didn't do anything. He was accused of being, he was a suspect in, I think, drugs and a murder case. I think they bust into his house, they beat up him and his brothers, they stole all their money, said they were drug lords, whatever, blah, blah. Meek Mill hadn't done anything. And then what happened was he was never given a fair trial. He was ended up being charged. He was then on probation. Now, he refused to let it go down. So he kept fighting. Just like Keith Browder, he kept fighting. And Meek Mill, this happened when I think he was 16 years old. And I think he's now 31, maybe 32. And when the documentary came out, which was only in the last couple of years, he was still on probation. So he was still at risk of going to prison for his whole life for something he never did in the first place. He'd had trials, he'd had constant warnings for breaking probation, for circumstances that were out of his control, the judge being completely biased and unfair towards him. And yeah, so there was just this constant stack of... And so when people turn around and say, okay, well, look at the stats say this, even if putting them like one versus the other, there is a higher number of black crime on paper to white, I would argue, like, how much of those crimes actually even existed, let alone the economic situation of those people, let alone being forced to commit crime. How many of those crimes actually even exist? Oof. You know? And it's like, it's not even, it's such a ridiculous argument when you look at all aspects of it, that you're just like, the fact that people still argue against it. And obviously the most basic argument being, okay, well, even looking at the statistics, how many black people in the US, how many white people in the US? Well, actually, hold on a sec, look at the difference. Demographically, like, there is only this amount of black people in the US, you know, and yet they are charged this much, they're arrested this much. Like, there's clearly a problem there.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing, is that, and this is what I was kind of discussing earlier, is that when you present a stat, regardless of what it is, you can argue it either way, right? So you could present 46% of the crime in the US is committed by 6% being black males, and so therefore look how bad black males are. But then you could also take that information and say, well, look how skewed the system is. And then at that point, those numbers mean nothing, because you can just make it mean whatever that worldview is. And it was something that a guy called Ali said earlier. He said that the insight and the reason as to why those things happen, why those numbers exist in the first place, is more helpful than the numbers themselves.
And yeah, exactly. And then going back to the focus of the point you were making about specifically black on black crime and the myth of black on black crime, like, those stats and the fact that essentially they're numbers, but the numbers mean very little. Once you break it down, the numbers become almost irrelevant, you know. And you look at, okay, well, we can't even say how much black on black crime in particular is. And then you look at, okay, well, why is white on white crime never spoken about, you know? Whether it is, again, actual crimes committed or not, white on white crime is never spoken about. And why is white on white crime never spoken about, you know? Why is it that when a black person does something in society or to another black person, that it is looked at as, this is a black person doing this to another black person, but when a white person does it, it's not considered that. And in the same way that we talk about Muslims and terrorism, you know, and there always being this disconnect when it comes to the white race. and the whole thing of a white person is an individual. A white person is themselves, which is also why they have problems understanding our issues sometimes, and have problem going, but I just don't get it. Like, I just don't see anybody like that. Like, I'm just me, you know. I just don't see color. I just don't. Yeah, because you don't have to.
Yeah.
You don't, like, I don't know what for you, but for me, like, when we've had this conversation with other groups of friends and been like, what does it actually feel like to be able to look at yourself as just your own person and not what you are?
Yeah.
I can't imagine not looking at myself as, you know, because everyone can say, yeah, but I know I'm white. Yeah, but I've always known and always had to think, when I do something or when I think something or someone does something to me, I'm always thinking it's about, or it's because of something about my race. Like, there is always that connection. When I'm in a group, it's always like I'm a black person in this group. I'm not just me in this group.
Yeah, this is something that I would experience all the time, and I imagine most people, especially if they have, like, the predominant amount of my friendship groups are largely white, just because of where I've grown up and my upbringing and all that kind of thing. And I have never not been reminded of my heritage, of my race. I remember when I was in college, I was actually on the picture of the the planner. You get the weekly planner, and they put it out for the masses to use. I was on the front of that planner, and I was carrying a bag, and I remember somebody drew a fuse that was sparking to that bag, and they showed it to me, and they were like, this is really funny. And at the time, you don't have a choice. I have to laugh with it. I'm like, yeah, that's really funny. But at the time, I was like, oh,
wow.
I was like, but it just informs every decision. And how can you ever convey what that feels like to somebody who will never ever experience it?
Yeah. It's impossible to convey that. It's impossible. The same way it's impossible to imagine, like, what it's like to step out the front door and think, will I get followed or raped, or will I?
Yeah, exactly.
Am I safe in the butt? Like there's something I just don't think about. And when I thought of it, I was like, oh, it makes sense as to why there's such a disconnect.
Yeah,
like such a massive, like, it's almost impossible. It's not impossible to be sympathetic and understand, but you know, it makes sense as to why there is this massive issue with trying to explain to the people who don't have that struggle as to why it isn't so easy to just be like, look, it doesn't matter what color we are, because it's never not mattered.
Yeah,
it's never not mattered to us for whatever reason, and many times for good reason. Like, I'm obviously proud of that, but it's one of those things.
It does. It's something, like, even about the conversation that we're currently having. Like, we're kind of, I spoke to you because I respect you, but you are of a particular ethnicity now that is now relevant, and speaking to you validates the things that you say because of where you're from and your background and stuff. And that kind of brings me on to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which was the idea of black conservatives. So for anybody who doesn't know what a black conservative is, Candace Owens is probably the most popular one to talk about at the moment. She is a Trump advocate who's kind of essentially repeatedly gone on record to say that all of the strifes that are occurring with and for black people are of their own doing. And that's something that I find so interesting, is a lot of the times when I'm speaking to someone who either has racist views or is racist themselves, they will find the first video they can of a black person agreeing with their statements.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've had the same thing.
I don't know much about Candace Owens. I see what my African American friends share, and I've looked her up. And within 5 minutes, I was like, oh, wow, I can't even with this woman.
I've actually had a couple questions in the chat, which I'd love to discuss before we carry on, if that's okay with you, dude.
Yes.
Peter has said, what do we need to do to change people's attitudes to racism? now to move to something more acceptable in the future?
Oh wait, that broke up then. Could you repeat the question?
Oh yeah, sure thing. Oh yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's not your fault. It's mine.